Hello. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the congressman who's, calling to us from Washington, D.C. Really appreciate you taking this time, and it's great to speak to you again. A little bit of an intro for the folks, if you have not read the ones to watch like bio. One of the reasons why we have this congresswoman is because she has one of the best kind of climate credentials in Congress. So she's new to Congress this year, but she's coming in with an actual rich history. She has worked for the UN. She was part of a team that helped put together the Paris Climate Agreement. And then when she was most recently Phoenix, working in the city council and different roles there, was working on extreme heat. So she knows this stuff like in her bones. And now, of course, she's in Congress, where at the federal level, and we're here to talk about climate action. And maybe I wanted to start very big picture, which is what we're seeing the federal government do is actually not action, but inaction or rolling back action. And so, is climate action right now at the federal level even possible?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Zahra. I really, really appreciate it. It was such an honor to be included on the Bloomberg Ones to Watch list. As you mentioned, I've worked on climate policy throughout my entire career, and it's really what drove me to run for public office in the first place. Look, I can't sugarcoat it. We're in a very, very difficult period at the federal level when it comes to climate action. I think some of the legislation in recent weeks, especially the Trump budget bill, it represents some of the worst environmental rollbacks that we've ever seen. There's, of course, been pauses on things like the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's, sales of public lands, massive giveaways to the oil and gas industry, cuts to the clean energy tax credits. It's really, really devastating for sure. I think the other issue that I'm really concerned about federally is FEMA and the direction that FEMA is headed in. We have seen just over the last week, the Secretary Kristi Noem demonstrate significant incompetence when it comes to managing FEMA and disasters like the horrific floods that we've seen in Texas. And when it comes to issues specific to Arizona, as it pertains to climate change, we really need FEMA to actually declare extreme heat as a natural disaster. It kills more people each year than flooding, hurricanes, et cetera, combined, but it's a silent killer. And so I'm very concerned that not only are we not strengthening FEMA to be ready to deal with the natural disasters presented to us by the climate crisis, but in fact, they are, this administration is really committed to forcing it back. So something I'm thinking a lot about, during Trump 1.0, I was a big part of a lot of the non-state climate action work that took place in the U.S. And across the world. We saw cities and states, tribes, companies step up like never before through, coalitions, through Bloomberg, through We Are Still In, mayors, C40, the governors, et cetera. We need to see that, again and fourfold, fivefold to deal with the challenges of this time. I think from my vantage point here, I'm really trying to mitigate harm at the federal level and really make the case for continuation of critical funding to our states and our cities. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't very concerned about the lack of federal action. It's really going to make it so that non-state actors will have to step up more. But this time, the challenge is that you have a very hostile administration that is really going after entities as well for anything that they deem Green New Deal-esque, which is obviously climate action.
So there are a couple things I want to kind of come back to, including the upcoming budget bill that I know is under discussion. But before that, I was hoping you could take a minute, since we did just recently have the big, beautiful bill pass a couple weeks ago, and it was something that you didn't vote for. I believe none of the Democrats in the House of Representatives voted for. And so if you could sort of take a minute to talk about what can you do as being part of this minority party to bring accountability? Like, what are the actions that you have right now? Where do you see it makes sense to spend your time and, to bring change when, say, legislation is passing and you're not voting for it and it's still kind of coming to be?
Well, it's absolutely, a very tough position and not an ideal position, but I think there's a couple things. So, one route that I'm taking is through some of the committee assignments that I have. I'm currently the ranking member, which means I'm the top Democrat of the subcommittee on energy and mineral resources. So this is the committee that oversees, policies related to energy, of course, and most, if not all, of the hearings that we have had so far, as decided by the Republican Party, have been about quote unquote unleashing American energy dominance, but it's predominantly focused on the oil and gas sector and also mining. And so I have used every hearing opportunity to really draw attention to the issue of corruption as it relates to the oil and gas sector, as it relates to contributions that were made to the president and now the payoffs that are being handed over to the industry through giveaways. And I think that's really, really important. I think this climate populism message is one that we really need to lean into, because like everything else, when it comes to the cost of living, there is a clear connection between your utility prices and your energy costs. In Arizona, your AC bills being higher than ever. There's a clear connection when we are entirely focusing our energy portfolio on oil and gas. That's what Republicans are doing right now. They completely want to get rid of solar and wind and renewable energy and only focus on one, which is a mistake when you're talking about energy costs. So I think that message and using the platform to make that very clear to people is important, especially as most Americans right now are hyper concerned, and rightly so, with the cost of living.
Yeah, so on some of those points, last night we had, for people who are in the room, who were maybe here, we had actress Jane Fonda. And one of her big points was that people don't actually know what was in the bill that just passed and how it's sort of tied to some of these things, whether it's related to electricity costs and clean energy and fossil fuels. So can you just very quickly kind of highlight someone who knows this stuff? Like, what do people need to know about what was in that bill? And then we can talk, next about, okay, what do we need to pay attention in the budget bill, which hasn't passed yet. And so, discussion is still very much live.
Well, so this bill that Trump signed into law is the budget. There's rescissions packages, and Republicans still want to do more reconciliation packages, but it was signed into law. And I actually held a 16-hour reading of the bill because we were also trying to expose the fact that Republicans released this 1,000-page bill in the middle of the night, which obviously meant that nobody had been able to read it in time for voting for it. But, the main things that you'll hear about, of course, are the Medicaid cuts, 17 million people getting thrown off of health insurance, largest cut to food assistance in American history, massive rollbacks of the clean energy tax credits. And this is really concerning. And I have heard from very conservative Arizonans about this, from conservative labor leaders, who represent electricians, building trades, et cetera, who were so excited and truly benefiting from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of the jobs. And they said very clearly to me that voting for this bill would be a massive job killer in Arizona. And that is extremely unfortunate, and something that they didn't understand why the conservative members would vote for such a thing. Similarly, the utility companies in Arizona that, for many years received a lot of flack about their raising of energy costs, but they've made very robust and ambitious carbon reduction commitments. Both APS and SRP are fully have commitments in line with the Paris Agreement, 2050, full phase out of coal by 2030, but they rely on these tax credits and these incentives to be able to reach those goals. And so those are the pieces related to climate that I think are most concerning. And then I just do want to emphasize that it's also a significant funding increase for Department of Homeland Security and ICE in the tune of about $170 billion, which means that the detention and deportation capacity is going to about quadruple.
So we've talked a lot about what's happened. I want to kind of pivot to the future. And so where do we go here when it comes to climate action? And I'm thinking both, right now, next couple of months, what you can do, but I'm also thinking a little bit more down the road. What can Democrats as a party do if they're the party that's been leading on climate action and they don't have control of the chambers right now? Let's say they, in a scenario, do take control of Congress in the midterms. Then what are the steps that they can do to kind of claw back on climate change? What do you see the priorities and what's even possible?
I think short term, the most important thing federally will be to mitigate the harm and continue to push back as much as possible and show the harmful impacts on energy costs to the American people, and try to work with some of the more moderate Republicans to try to push some of them back. I bring this up only because the vote has already passed, but right now, for example, in the Senate, we're seeing Senator Hawley, who was one of the people who was against the Medicaid cuts. He voted for the bill, and now he's introducing a new bill to not cut Medicaid. And it's absurd, but I think similar avenues could be explored when it comes to the clean energy piece of things, because there are Republicans who were vocally against those, but still voted nonetheless. Again, I think local, state, corporate action is going to be vital. It's really, I'm really hoping that the private sector in particular doesn't succumb to fear from this administration and continues and charts, moves forward. I talked to folks from GM yesterday, for example, and they made very clear they will continue with all of the progress they were making on their electrification and continue to invest heavily there, and nothing's changing. So that's great news. And then elections are key. I can't emphasize that enough. 2026, winning back the House is going to be really important. And now is a really important time for Democrats to plan when it comes to what is the legislation that we want to push forward when we have the House, and again, when we have the trifecta. I'm going to be leading. I think different caucuses are working on different things, but within the Progressive Caucus, I'm going to be leading a lowering costs task force where we're really going to hone in and listen to ideas and put forward the bold policies that we want to push for in 2026, 2028, and beyond. And I really want to roll in climate from the energy perspective here, because again, I think there's a strong affordability case that needs to be made. I heard on the previous interview, housing as well. There's a strong housing link to climate, and I think continuing to innovate on the communications of it all too, right? Like, as far as I've been doing this work, just in the last decade, I've seen the communications on climate change shift and advance with the times, and I think we have to be cognizant there as well.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you just mentioned about this effort to maybe introduce a new bill on Medicaid. I don't want to talk about that, but this idea that it sounds like you're saying there might still be opportunities to work across the aisle on some of these things like clean energy. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like where you're seeing the opportunities maybe to work with Republicans, because right now, obviously, they've been voting for this. They've been passing this, and yet it seems like you're getting the sense that there might be some wiggle room there.
So I'm an optimist by nature. And I think that when you are in such an unpredictable environment, unpredictable opportunities will come about as well. And we're 6 months in, we're seeing immense damage from this administration. And I think that the impacts are going to start really having ripple effects across our economy and our society. And there will be a need by some Republicans to show more good faith in working on things that matter to people. I think my focus will be Arizona. I think if, we start seeing impacts of job losses and angry constituents in these districts that we're going to really benefit from these clean energy jobs, I think that is an opening to work with folks from across the aisle. I'm planning to attend the COP this year in Brazil with a big delegation as well of members of Congress and some senators as well. And we'll be looking for opportunities there too, to work with private sector to really engage and also show our international partners that while we may not have federal government support in the White House, there is still a massive contingent within the United States House of Representatives that takes this issue seriously and will be back in 2026 with real plans.
Well, I feel like that's a perfect, hopeful, optimistic note to end on. I really want to thank you for taking your time. Can we give a round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you.